And trust leads to an environment where we can offer feedback, which some will interpret as criticism, but feedback for growth and for improvement. And if I love you, I'm going to tell you that you're doing things that don't represent the values and person or characteristics that you say you want to be or that you are. I'm going to help you. That's going to be awkward for us sometimes because it's going to hurt for you to hear it, especially from somebody who you trust and you love.
Welcome to the Next Level Podcast. I'm Joe Mooney, along here with Brian Lemmer and Holden Law. So the purpose of the podcast is to share our conversations with those who are striving to perform and maximize their own ability. It's our hope that their insight will resonate with our listeners and maybe even challenge their own perspectives on categories such as striving to become their best, embracing or overcoming adversity, pressure or failure, or maybe just defining what high performance means to them. So as we look at our lineup of next level guests, what we're really looking for is people who are striving to reach their own maximum ability. So we've gone out and intentionally found people who are competing on the world or professional stage, as well as those who are competing in the amateur or scholastic arenas. So with that, we hope that you enjoyed this next episode of the Next Level Podcast. Okay, so I'm really excited this week because we have Greg Holker from the Augsburg men's soccer program on our program. And Greg has been an incredible mentor for me and for a lot of coaches in the area. So he first started at Augsburg 16 years ago and has been the head coach since then. He's guided the Augies to 3 different NCAA tournaments in that time and even reached the Sweet 16 of the tournament in 2008. He's also twice been named the MIAC or MIAC Coach of the Year. So along with being a competitor, and you'll hear that competitive passion come out in this conversation, Greg prides himself on being a teacher. He teaches much more than the game of soccer, and he's molded his mission to help young men in his program really become the best versions of themselves. Through that mission, he has become a mentor for many players and coaches. You'll hear him speak to the fact that he has over 100 of his former players who are now coaching in the game, which is just incredible that he's had that kind of positive influence on so many young men that he's coached. And as you'll hear me talk about, his mentorship has really had a positive influence on me and my coaching career. His energy and passion are just contagious, but it's his care for the people he works with in the environment of family and love that he's instilled in his program that's just had coaches like me wanting to emulate what he does into our own programs. Finally, I think the reason this conversation really resonated with me and why I always take so much out of my conversations with Greg is that he is constantly chasing the balance between his family and his career. He's very clear in his values, and you'll hear that come out in this conversation as well. I'm really grateful for his mentorship and for being the role model that a lot of young coaches have looked up to in their careers. And I think his words will really hit with a lot of our listeners as well. So with that, I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation with Greg Holker as much as we all did here. Hey, Greg, thanks a lot for coming on the show. How you been?
Surviving. I have 4 children in 4 different grades of school, and my wife works full-time as well. So from 6 a.m. until lunchtime, I am the homeschool teacher. And these people are not paid enough.
What's your favorite class to teach, and what's the one that gives you the most trouble?
Phi Ed is the favorite class to teach. We play soccer in the basement or now in the backyard, now that it's a little bit warmer. And the worst class to teach, I like teaching all of them, actually. I think it's more about like the quality of the students that I'm dealing with. I think that some of them have some behavioral and attention disorder things that they might have acquired from somebody in the bloodline.
Fair enough. So
and
who's the teacher and who's the principal at the Holker house?
Oh, that's a really good question. My wife is the principal. I think she might even be the district superintendent.
Right on.
I do what I'm told.
Nice. Well, I want to get into, some of the deeper things about your coaching philosophy and some of the player dynamics that you've dealt with. But before we do that, if you could just give us maybe a brief overview of, just kind of your time as a coach, obviously starting with the youth and the high school level, and maybe even go back to you as a player and then kind of work your way up to the present here working at Augsburg.
I'll give you just like a biographical timeline. I think, I played at Gustavus from 1996 to 99. I had a healthy career there, really enjoyed the soccer, enjoyed my teammates and Larry in the program. And so I stayed for 2 additional seasons, 2000 and 2001 as a graduate assistant. Now my GA position was in the sports information office. So I was understanding the work of an athletic administrator a little bit more richly while I did my graduate work in sports administration. Concurrently, I was volunteering as a men's soccer assistant coach. So I was doing everything that you would expect to support the men's soccer program, particularly recruiting a lot. And I felt as though that was a good foot in for me, at least in how you're doing things concurrent. While I was playing, I was coaching youth teams all through that time and in the grad school as well. So I was always coaching ODP and club teams and just, figuring out how to do things on my own. But scholastically, I think that was a good pathway. When I left Gustavus, I went to Bloomington Jefferson. Danny Sterling is the coach there. And at the time he was, not that he's not anymore, but he was kind of the hot dog around town. And we were at the regional championships. I had taken like a Burnsville team, U19 Burnsville team. We won State Cup and went to Region 2 in Toledo, Ohio, and Danny was there. And just talking to him. So I just said, what do I need to do to work for you? Because I want to learn. I want to learn from somebody who's got a lot of experience and has been really successful. And he was coaching a Tsunami Soda team at the time. It was a really good team. And so he was nice enough to let me tag along. He took me on. So I was an assistant coach at Bloomington Jefferson just for 1 season. That was in 2002. And then I left to go to be the head coach at the Academy of Holy Angels in 2003. And that for me was that was awesome. I mean, I actually went to Holy Angels when I was in 9th grade. My parents had yanked me out of the public school system after 4th grade and said, let's get you in line. And so I went to a Catholic school and 5th through 8th grade and then 9th grade at Holy Angels. And then I couldn't get out of there quick enough, not because Holy Angels wasn't a good place, but because I was always determined to get back to my friends and get back to the public school setting. So then going back there as a coach was unique and it was comfortable. And I was, aware of what it was like. And so I think that helped connect to some of the players a little bit better and the administration a little bit better and had a really positive experience. But then Mike Navarre, who was the men's and women's coach at the time at Augsburg, had stepped down. I think there was some restructuring of the position, which was fortunate because he was absolutely overworked. And the men's position opened up. It was just a stipend part-time coaching job. They paid $7,000. I didn't care. I was 25. So I went all in on it. And the irony in this scenario is that the other finalist for the job was Danny Storley from Jefferson.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they offered him the job. And he said no, which he was never going to say yes, not to a part-time gig like that, where he's in a good spot at Jefferson, has a great career. So that opened the door for me as a young coach to come in March of 2004, and I did. And, the journey at Augsburg was a rich journey. It has been a very rich and fulfilling journey. Certainly we inherited a program that had known 25 consecutive losing seasons. And, really when they're only winning 1 or 2 games in the league since 1980, it was a really interesting culture shock, I'll say. That spring practice, the first one, I was like, oh God, what did I sign up for? This isn't going to work. But, and with respect to the guys that were in the team at the time, I mean, and they'll tell you the same thing. They weren't good enough. But they worked their butts off for me, and they did what they needed to do. And we won 7 games in September. We were 7-3-1 in the first season, and we tied McAllister, ending a 54 game, something insane winning streak. Maybe it wasn't 54, but it was a lot. We got outshot like 85-1, but whatever.
Right.
Take it and run. And we had some successes. And then in October, I was young. I was 25. I didn't know the difference. So I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And the next thing you know, we were 7-9-2. So we went 0-6-1. The guys just ran out of steam. If I could do it again, I would have given them a week off or 10 days off and just started over. but you learn from every single year, every experience. And, 3 years in, we were 13, 3-3, and in the MIC playoffs. 5 years, we were in the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament. In 2010, we won a conference playoff title. Back to the tournament. We've had a pretty good run, and I think that the evolution as a coach for me has been that I wanted to win so bad, and I was just a hyper competitive, crazy, hardworking guy. And now I just I don't really care about winning. I mean, I love winning; like it's fun. It's fun, but it's not what drives me. And that's probably the great evolution in a coaching career as we get a little bit older, and you're sneaking up on that same boat. And that's just investing more in the young men that you work with and the young people that you work with, and helping them become best versions of themselves. That's where the fulfillment really comes into play, and just achieving their personal best, whatever that might be. That's better than my own ego winning a game.
I love that. And I want to get deeper into the philosophy there. And I think that evolution is something that I definitely want to hit on. Before we get into that, just a couple of things that you had brought up throughout your timeline there. You mentioned yourself as a player, and I'm wondering, first, I know where you played on the field and everything, but if you could maybe just, tell everybody listening in kind of what your position was, but then I want to hear more about your style of play. And I never saw you as a player, but I can imagine just from knowing you, Holks, like what your style of play was. But if you could maybe describe yourself as a player, I think I just love to hear kind of what your definition of a player was.
Maybe I'll work my way backwards.
All right.
If you're a teammate, like in the men's league that I play in, you would say that Greg is super technical and he's not going to move more than 3 feet. So if the pass isn't right into my like where I can deal with it, I'm going to be pissed off at you, because I'm not running into open channels. It's just give me the ball, and then we'll be fine if you give me the ball. I think if you work your way backwards to my college experience, I mean, I played wherever Larry needed me to play for sure. As a young player, as a freshman, I mean, I started as a freshman, and I started, up front as a 9, and then in the midfield as a 10. Probably 60% of the game, 70% of the game, played every game. My sophomore year, I played mostly in the center midfield. Jeff Giovinazzo suffered an injury at Wheaton. That was the year they won the national championship, and they pumped us. And I ended up playing right back for a couple of weeks until he recovered, and then I went back in the midfield. My junior year, I played as a 9. I was up top the entire season. My senior year, I was a 10 for the most part. So, I mean, I'm a player who I use my brain, because I'm not fast. I can't move really well. But the ball likes me, and I like the ball, so it'll stay pretty close, and I make pretty good decisions. I will also say, defensively, then I was pretty vicious. So I ran a lot. I worked really hard, and I just took a lot of pride in never losing a 1v1 duel. Now, let's fast forward back again to my men's league teammates who know not to pass the ball anywhere other than to my feet. They'll say, this kid doesn't defend at all. He's not going to run. And they're totally right. I have zero interest in it anymore.
Right. So as a player, especially going back to like your most competitive days, how much of that have you brought into your coaching style? Does it influence the way you coach?
It did initially, right? I think a lot of the early young coaches are going to play the way that they played or were comfortable playing, and perhaps the way that they'll set up their team the way that their coach set up the team. And that was true for me too. So it was about like discipline and rigidity and hard work and grind and grit. And, there wasn't a lot of fluidity or creativity or freedom of expression at that time. It was very much a dictatorial environment. I was the bad guy, and I was the puppeteer. I was moving all the pieces, and I don't think the guys had a chance to use their brains ever. And so I regret that in some ways, but I also don't, because, we moved the needle ahead to be able to become and get a little bit more sophisticated player. And then I became more sophisticated. So I would say that in the early years, very much rigid. Today, I think the only thing that I'm really going to coach or have expectations for are in regard to structure is in the defensive setup, just to make sure that the opposition and the threats are accounted for at all times. But as we move forward, we want to play with the ball. You've seen it. You've played us. You've seen us play. we want to have it a lot, and we're going to have it
Mm-hmm.
a lot. I think we had it every single game except for one against Gustavus, and I was very clear that we're not going to have the ball today, and we're going to give it to them because they got a dangerous front three. We're just going to squeeze all the space out so they can't get in, and it worked, and we won 1-0. So sometimes you have to adjust a little bit of what you want to do to get the result you need. But for the most part, I would prefer not to do that. I would prefer to say we can have the ball the entire time and get the result that we want. But I think that I don't know. I want kids to be able to express themselves and show me who they are. And we have such a diverse team,
Mm-hmm.
and that is such a really powerful and cool tool. But it's also a great challenge as a coach to take a lot of different styles from a lot of different places, cultures, and to merge it into a place that works structurally effectively, but still celebrates the individual. And I think that's our great challenge today. And we've done a good job of it. It doesn't mean we're always going to win. But I think we've been willing to walk away from that saying, and I just mentioned earlier, winning isn't that important anymore. It's really about, did we get better today? And did we give everything we had in regard to the controllables? And if we did those things, then we're moving the needle forward and we're in a good spot. If we didn't, we have to reflect even deeper. We're going to reflect regardless, but we're going to reflect at a deeper level and figure out what it is that might need to change. And if it's behaviors, if it's mentality, or if it's personnel, but it usually is in that order.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. You talked a little bit about playing for Larry's Lens, obviously legendary coach in the Minnesota area. And he was at Gustavus for 20 something years, right? How much of his philosophy, you mentioned kind of early on, you took a lot from, just your playing days. And I'm assuming that there was some of his philosophy that leaked into yours. How much of that would you say is still there? How much of it has kind of shaped your coaching style and philosophy? Or have you kind of completely taken on your own kind of identity?
Yeah, I mean, Larry was I think the things that I would credit him for that were influential for a positive reason were his organization, the structure of the team, the methodicalness of his thought and preparation for opponents and for teams. And I think I spent more time in his office than he ever wanted me to, because I was I wanted to learn and wanted to grow. And I think that was one thing I think I took away from also my experience with Larry that I was going to change, was relationships with players. And to Larry's credit, that evolved too. I think when I became an assistant and watched some of the ways that he interacted with players, even especially after I left, he grew and evolved in that way too. I think we all do, right? So I'm not Larry. There's no question about it. I'm very different than Larry, but I've got some Larry-isms in me.
Sure.
And there's moments when I'll scream like back, and I'm like, shit, that was Larry yelling,
right.
20 years ago.
Right.
Like it's just that recovery run and that mentality of, but he was a defender in a man v man system at DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. So like, it's just, he's a big, strong boy. Like it's different. Like the game's so different.
Yep.
And so if you don't evolve, you're just not going to be around very long. And I think that today, there are some things that I take that I think are relevant, and I would love to continue to utilize those things that I think are relevant. There are others that I think have changed and are no longer relevant. And there are also things that I learned that I say I was not going to do based on my experience. And I think that everyone's going to have that experience with everybody, and players are all having that with me too. And they're having it with you as well.
Yeah.
At Superior.
Oh yeah.
And it's not in any way to discredit us for the work we put in or the effort that we invest in each of the the young men that we try to influence positively. But we learn from each of those experiences to get better.
So on that note of just kind of getting better and continuing to develop, you talked earlier about when you first were coaching under Coach Storlene that you just wanted to be a sponge, and you talked about that even with Coach Lenz, that you wanted to be just soaking everything up and learning, and I'm sure you did that. But then throughout your career as a head coach, at some point you became more the teacher, in terms of coaching. And that's where I came into play was, I was that young guy a few years after you, and you were kind of a mentor for me. I mean, not kind of, I mean, you were a great mentor for me. After I got past the fact that I was going to battle you and I wanted to beat you. I mean, like when I got, more to the point of like, hey, can I just learn from this guy? I guess my point, Holks, is that as you became more that mentor for a lot of younger coaches coming up, how did you continue to develop? How did you continue to challenge yourself to still grow and still learn yourself as you became more, sort of the top level coach, passing things on down to others?
I think my job was to make others better than me. And so I thought, I mean, I think if you've got a big, we all have egos, right? But man, if mine was big, that would be a hard thing for me to swallow. What do you think I've been doing in this COVID thing? I've been spending time with former players of mine who are now coaching in MLS clubs and in universities and whatever. And guess who's teaching? It ain't me.
Right.
I'm learning from the guys that played for me and got their start in an area where I think we just encouraged investigation and self-discovery and continuing education and this lifelong learning, this passion for learning, that when I didn't have children, I was able to do more vigorously. And it's just a reality of having a family is you can't, if you're going to say that I'm going to model behavior to the players that I work with every day, and I'm going to show you that balance is possible, and this is how to be a good husband first, how to be a good father, and a good steward and citizen in our community, I'd be the greatest hypocrite ever. And so because the fact that I've had children, I embrace that and love that more than anything because it's taught me so many other things that I can also apply in my teaching and coaching. but it's certainly helped me to lean on those guys that I spent as much time as I did with in the early years. I mean, James C. is somebody to take into consideration. He's the head coach of Holy Angels today. Mm-hmm. They just won a state championship. In the last 2 years, they're like 54-2. That's impressive no matter where you are, but it's not the record that's impressive. It's the way the boys play. And it's the way that James lifts up that program and invests in the experience of each of those kids. That for me, that's impressive. I'm learning from that. Yeah. I learn from Evan Foose weekly, twice a week. I'm on these Zoom calls with his academy teams for the Columbus Crew, and he's doing video analysis, and the kids are all talking about clips, and he's showing clips, and it's not just like the clips and what that means soccer wise. I mean, that's one thing, but it's about the interactions and the personalities and how he motivates and inspires those kids to take ownership in their own development and then bring it forward so that their teammates can all grow and learn together. Like, it's amazing stuff. And so for me, it's just, I don't know, learn from others as much as you can. Your question essentially is what happened? How do you learn from others? And it's for me, it was teach the young guys to be so ambitious and go after it so much that they would be so much better than me so that they could teach me. And another guy like Chris Chudovitsky, he's the head coach at University of Montana on the women's program. And he was the assistant at Augsburg on the women's side with Mike Navarre. And after that fall season, he came into my office and said, I want more. I need to be challenged more. Can I please work for you? Yes, that created some serious awkwardness in the office, right? Because he left Mike's office to come to my office seeking further, education. Fine. Then I get a call in the spring. Eric Stacey, he's the athletic director at St. Kate's, calls and says, I want somebody like you. Do you have what you did at Augsburg? I want. Do you know anybody like that? And I'm like, son of a bitch. He's sitting right next to me. I didn't even get a chance to have a season with the guy, but I know it. And there it is. And Chris went to St. Kate's for, I think, 5 or 6 successful seasons before going to North Dakota or North Dakota State. And then now he's at University of Montana. But this is a guy who took learning at a whole new level. And so he would deliver a lot of things to me. That helped me.
Yeah. So you mentioned, when you started at Augsburg, you had a very dictator style, this is what we're going to do. And in general, that has a very quick turnaround from what you needed of taking a program that wasn't winning a lot to winning a lot. You could put your style and stamp it into the boys very quickly. And now you just mentioned, you're learning from your former player at Columbus Crew that giving the guys a way to express themselves, having them review clips and whatnot. That's some way to build some individuals into the program. Your coaching, you've been coaching for 16 years. How has that changed visually from a day-to-day when you talk about yourself and what you've learned? How have you implemented that into your daily practices? How have you changed your recruiting style to recruit different types of guys? Like, you're learning what you've learned. How have you implemented it into your own coaching styles?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just think that that's going to create some self-reflection here that I may not like. I say that only because the amount of time that I invested in the program as a young coach was insane. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was laying hardwood floors. I was a part-time $7,000 a year. I was laying hardwood floors for a company called A to Z Wood Flooring. I was coaching 2 club teams. I was doing Corver camps. I was doing whatever it took to move myself forward. I was still working 100 hours a week at Augsburg, investing and flipping in the program. And through 2008, and I remember we were in the Sweet 16 of 2008, and we were at Loris. We lose in double overtime. And that was the night that we told my parents in the hotel in wherever the heck that place is, somewhere in Iowa, that we were pregnant with our first child. And to be honest, like, Brian, that's when things changed. And I remember at the banquet, because I told the guys forever, I'm not having kids till we win a national championship. I'm not, because I know we're good. I know what it takes. We're going to go. I didn't know what it takes. I mean, I had an idea, I had a guess. But then when that happened, everything changed. So that's the self-reflection. And I say that to justify probably the amount of time I don't spend hunting and chasing what I was once hunting and chasing. So in regard to, like, how do I implement the things that I take and learn from others? I think first you have to understand that I'm not working 100 hours a week. And that's also relevant to providing that balance and an example of how to be a good husband and a good father and a good steward of our community to the young men that I am able to work with and lead. Mm-hmm. So moving forward, there's so much that comes at me from so many people. I have over 100 former Augsburg men's soccer players are coaches. 100 in 16 years of coaching there. That in itself, I am more proud of than any game we've ever won, any event ever. That for me is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. I still have a role in coach education with U.S. Soccer. I still have a role in community soccer, local soccer, in the club that I grew up in, where I help mentor and shape the future of the coaches that they're there and work with them, because that's what I love to do, is to make people better than me. Mm-hmm. But when you take that all in, you have to pick and choose what you can actually implement. And a lot of it, I get, gosh, is it fun? I want to implement it right away. Like the stuff that Evan's doing right now, I'm all video clip library. I'm pulling this, pulling that. I'm like, Samuel, my assistant, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then the reality is like, okay, maybe you've done this before in your life, but let's just say here's 20 things, the 20 most important things in your life. Write them down. Okay. Now circle the 5 most important out of those 20. That's all you're doing. Get rid of the other 15. They don't matter. Pay attention to those 5, invest in those. And for us, culture is ahead of everything else, and interpersonal relationships and creating a vision of what it looks like for these young men to be able to achieve success, especially coming from the circumstances that a lot of our players come from. That to me is way more important than breaking down film. That's way more important than recruiting. It's just way more important. And I say that, and I still recognize that there are times when I lose sight of that, and I start to invest in some of those soccer things that I talked about in the club environment versus the scholastic environment, that get really heavy into all the little things and nuances we can do to make this better. Man, this is awesome. This is awesome. Let's try this. Let's do this. Let's do this. At the end of the day, just keep it simple, man. Keep it simple and care. Just care about the people that you're around and help them understand that you care about them and push them to be the best versions of themselves. And there are a lot of different tools to do that. And every one of you can figure out the tool that works best for you, but it has to fall within your personal values. It must. If it lays outside of it, it's not going to work. The soccer might be sexy. The other things might be sexy. It's not going to work.
So Greg, I want to jump in and go back to, so You mentioned the transition in trying to find more balance. And I think that's something that a lot of coaches, when they get into their career early on, before they're married or before they have kids and before just kind of life takes over a bit, I think there is that, just kind of like that hit the ground running mentality. And, I can certainly empathize with coming into a program that, I wanted to change and just like yourself. And that takes, like you said, it takes literally hundreds of hours a week to try to do that, 100 hours a week. So you mentioned kind of one of the big wake up calls was making that announcement that, yep, Connie and I are pregnant and here this is going to change things. But I'm curious, like, did you go into that next season knowing things were going to be different? Because the reason I bring this question up is when Rachel and I found out that we were pregnant, I did a poor job of finding that balance for probably about 2 years. First it was, I'm 100% in on coaching. This isn't going to change me. I'm going to still be that dedicated. And I think I dropped the bottom a bit on, my duties as a dad and as a husband. And when I recognized that, it went 100% the opposite direction, where I was all in on dad and husband. And like, I didn't see my office for like a week at a time. Right. And so it was this really out of whack balancing act. That's how I got into it. I'm curious to hear how your transition was in trying to find that balance.
Well, I'm glad I wasn't the only one then.
I suspected maybe we've got a club. Yeah.
So in 2008, we made that announcement, right? Braden was born in June of 2009. I didn't stop doing what I was doing. I went full blow. We won the conference playoff championship back in the NCAA tournament 2010, 2011 back in the playoff. My daughter was born in March of 2011, Lydia. That's when I hit. Okay, because it's man to man now.
Mm-hmm.
Right when it was zone 2-1, and I could be like the guy who's the men's league player I am today, not doing a lot of work, but taking some of the credit for it.
Right.
that worked out, right? But it didn't when Lydia was born, and so then you'll see if you just look at our program year by year, 2012, 2013, 2014, what happened? Well, the Augies weren't very good. I shrunk the team intentionally. We limited recruiting. I left it in the hands of others. And I did the same thing you did. I pushed the balance toward my family too heavily, which it was just never a bad thing, by the way, for anyone listening. That's not a bad thing. It's just you have to figure out a way to get the ship straight so that you can handle both responsibilities and do so well, do your job well, and serve the people that you're supposed to be serving.
Was there ever a question?
So 2014.
Sorry, I want to jump in quick, Greg. Was there ever a question for you in terms of like, can I still do this? Can I still be a college coach and get the same satisfaction and enjoyment that I used to? Or do I need to find something else to do?
No, I'm back in. But
okay.
But yes, you're right. There was a dinner at preseason. I don't remember if it was 13 or 14. I think it was 14. Wait, Atlanta wasn't born yet. Must have been 13. I don't remember what the heck year these kids were born. I have too many of them.
It's a blur.
But it was, it was we were at dinner and we were at this place the night before preseason. And I remember, and you'd probably find it on social media somewhere way back when. I remember taking a picture of my family saying, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I don't know if I want to walk away from my family.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I'm doing. That's what you do. Whether or not, I found ways to be more effective as a parent and as a husband in the fall. But ultimately, our priority between August 15th and November 15th is with our university teams, is with the college teams. And our family takes a back seat during that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have an understanding spouse or partner and you're an effective communicator and that's all laid out ahead of time, it's certainly a lot easier. That isn't always the case because sometimes you come into a relationship while you're already doing what you're doing and it's hard to understand. So to answer your question, your first question, I did the same thing you did. Second question, yes, I wanted to walk away from it. And I'm glad that I didn't. And I'm glad that I found balance.
What pulled you back in?
2014, I just got motivated again. And it was like, I don't like what we're doing. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way we're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? We're still playing like we were in 2004. it wasn't easy on the eye. It wasn't getting results. The quality of player wasn't amazing, but that was in part because of the quality of our work wasn't very good. So I just got pissed off and motivated and threw everything into 2015 and said, we're going to change everything. We're going to change the way we play. We're going to change who we are as our identity. We're going to become this decision-making, give the power to the players, have the ball, be brave, be bold, take risks, give up goals that maybe because we're being so brave and bold, and I'm willing to give away with those. I'm willing to lose games because of it. Because we're losing anyway. So what the hell is the point? We might as well have fun and learn and try to get better while we're doing it. And then that changed everything quickly. 2016, we're back in the playoffs, and 17 was a bit of a hiccup, and 18 we're in a final again and back in the NCAA tournament where we're, we lose to you. But we're playing well, and we're a good side, and we're fun, and the culture's positive and strong, and the men are together and united. And I have balance in my home, and my wife's like, that wasn't that bad. The fall wasn't terrible at all. I thought it was good. That's how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So is that when, that 2014, is that when you have a motto up in your office and in your locker room, I think, for you, for soccer, for life? Is that when that came about, or was that at a different point?
No, that came in 2004. That came right away.
Okay.
That was right away. And actually, Eric Singer was an assistant coach at the time. He sent me, we were creating recruiting materials and brochures to send out, and he put that at the top of one of our recruiting brochures, and it stuck. The tagline stuck. The meaning was never really investigated and gutted until more recently. And then I think probably you're fair to say, as what you were maybe alluding to, was in that time range of 14, 15, 16, we really got into the nuts and bolts of what that meant. And then last year, 2 years ago, 2018, we laid out, some foundational values, 4 words that are going to describe what our character is going to be. But ultimately, what we do as a program, our responsibility is to invest in you as a human being, to make sure you're the best version of yourself that you can be. We're going to do it through soccer. It's the vehicle to teach you the important lessons that are going to propel you forward for life. And our relationships are forever. It is not a 4-year term experience. That's the fun thing. And I was supposed to have this COVID interrupted it, but I was supposed to have one of my former players, former team captain, and his wife, the 2 boys, and she's pregnant with the 3rd child. They were supposed to come over for dinner on Saturday. And we were doing this every 2-3 weeks. I still do it. I was supposed to be in Hilton Head last week with alumni playing golf. Right? Like, that is what this is all about for me. That's where the fulfillment comes from. So for you, for Soccer for Life, I mean, the tagline was early, but the manifestation of what it really meant took some time to evolve and grow. But it's absolutely who we are. And I think everybody knows who we are. Everybody knows how we play. They know what the personality of our players is going to be like. They know what the experience and the interactions with me are going to be like. There are no secrets. We are not hiding anything from anybody. I'm as transparent as ever. I feel like I always have been, but I think now that what we do, we're so sure of who we are and what we do, that's easier for others to recognize.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's sort of 4 words that you guys have adopted. Do you mind sharing those, or is that more of an in-house, like between you and the boys?
No, it's fine. I mean, committed, industrious, selfless, and resilient. And resilient is the word that's above the whiteboard next to the big screen in the locker room for a reason, right? You've got to be resilient in that space because this is a teaching space, and we have to be vulnerable and willing to accept that this isn't criticism, that this is information that helps you become a better version of yourself. But if you're not resilient, it will break you. So it's tough. And then, selfless stands at the center point of our locker room. That's the most important thing that we must be to each other and to the community and to the people that we serve. We have to put others in front of us when we make decisions. And that's just making the world a better place. And that's a lot about Augsburg, serving our neighbors and serving our community. And I think that those values are something that I've really gravitated towards. Industrious, believe it or not, is above the entrance to the restrooms.
Okay.
But it's That's just because we didn't have anywhere else to put it,
Right.
But I think a lot of people think industrious and they think of it as use of limited resources. Really, it's about just being a hardworking person and diligent and really working super hard. But I think the word also defines the fact that we don't have the resources that our neighbors have. But that's not going to stop us. I mean, we could put grit up there as well. I think that defines who we are as an institution and as an athletic department really well.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, that word in particular resonated. And then committed is above the door as you walk out. And that's just, you're headed out to the field now. You're headed out to the weight room. You're headed out to the space where this locker room is a safe space for us to gather and share our lives and share our stories and share our joy and fun and sorrow and sadness too, and challenges and stress. But when we leave the store, we got to be committed to what it is. And this group, that's what we're committed to. This program, we're committed to that above everything else. And that's where our selflessness also kicks in. So those are the ways that we lay out our program today.
And so with those core values, I'm assuming that's what you call them or something similar to that. Yeah. Is that something that you came up with, or did you and your staff come up with that? Or did that come from the team? How did those words kind of come into play for Augsburg soccer?
Yeah, no, I mean, it took about 2 years. So it was years in the making. And it was, but I think James C. should receive a lot of credit for that. I mean, he's the head coach at Holy Angels, but he's doing all this work because the program means something to him. And I think that reflects the for life thing. So he and I had a lot of dialogue. Our coaching staff had several communications. There's a lot of surveys. The players had input. Alumni had some input. But ultimately, we put out 4 words that we thought, and that was the coaching staff, and between 2017 and 18, that this most accurately reflects who we are and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I love that. I want to get more into the evolution of just kind of your philosophy. We've talked about the balance between, kind of work and life. But from your philosophy as a coach, you've talked a little bit more about going from just being this like really uber competitive guy. And a lot of it was about winning. And now it's become more, and obviously I think for any coach, like winning is still important. That's what you're trying to do, but it's so much more about that personal development side. How else have you changed as a coach through your time over the last 16 years?
Well, if you ask the guys that played for me in 2005, 6, 7, 8 in that range, what I was like as they watch me today, and our current players get to hear it from them because they come back to our locker room and speak all the time, and they're like, "You guys are so lucky. Holker's such a softie." So yeah, I mean, I don't know how I did it. I yelled so much. I mean, I was more fit back then. I mean, maybe that gave me the energy to do it, but the veins would pop out of my head, and I think I just willed the group along. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Like pushing my personality on them, and that worked. It's a narrow-minded thing. It's a short-sighted thing. It will work. It is effective in the short term for sure, and I think that's sometimes why some of the coaches that our colleagues that we work with are successful using that model, because it's a 10-week season. So you can squeeze it all out of them if you want. And if that's what your goal is in the end, is to win games, squeeze it out of them and you'll win. But I just don't like it anymore. It's not any fun. It gives me a headache to yell at people. And I also believe so much more now in personal evolution and self-discovery and players discovering, finding who they are first, probably discovering their own personal values. Our program values are one reference point for them to work off of, but they've got to discover who they are. We'll ask the question all the time, what are you values? Well, family is a value of mine. Okay, well, how much time did you spend with your family in the last week? Let's log it. How much time? How much time did you spend on Netflix or on, the gaming system or on whatever? Is family really one of your values? Right? Okay, so it probably is. But what this means is that you've got to change your behaviors to match your values. If family's a value of yours, you're investing in your family. And it's important to you, and you put it as a priority.
Mm-hmm.
but that's up to them. So I think for me, that's probably been the greatest. That's where I've gone. I just find a lot more joy in helping these guys discover who they are. And I mean, Lionel Vang's a great example of that. I mean, he was a player of the year this year in our league, and if COVID wasn't around, he'd be a pro right now. I mean, he had something set up down in Phoenix, and he was ready to go. And it's just when he was a first-year student at Augsburg, oh my God, the kid thought he knew everything, and he was a really talented player. But he'd always been, I think, probably because he was so good, others were so fearful that they would lose him that they never pushed him and held him accountable, pushed him to be more. Right? They're just like, oh my God, this kid's so good. Don't piss him off because he'll leave. And if he leaves, we're not going to be as good. And I would say that I did that too a little bit with him in the beginning. And then I'm like, this kid's taking this leash and running with it. And I'm done with it. So I'm putting a choke collar on, and it's got a shock collar too. And I'm doing both. I'm pulling back and I'm zapping him right in the throat. And he's not going anywhere. And I don't care what he thinks. Like if he wants to go, he can go. But if he doesn't buy into what we're doing, I don't want him here. And that, I think, really helped change Lionel. And he'll share his story with you if you ever have him on, about his personal evolution. His family is really important to him. And I think for him to discover that and understand the contributions and the modeling that he was responsible for in his own home and in his community, I think that experience for me was so much more uplifting than him going from, a talented player who become the conference player of the year. It was just seeing his identity come to life. And so he understood it and now can take it and run with it.
Well, Greg, through that, so on the one side of it, it's very clean. I mean, to be like very competitive and it's all about winning. And, everything we do is just to be excellent and to win soccer games. Like that's a very like crisp and clean sort of philosophy and methodology. And then on the other side of it, I think where you've gotten to where it's all about, personal development, and we're going to use soccer as sort of the vehicle to do that. That is a very kind of clean philosophy as well. But there's a transition there that I have to assume was not real clean. And I'm curious, in that transition, going from that super competitor to this guy that's really all about personal development, I can't imagine that was easy for players to adjust to. I can't imagine that that every day when you showed up at the office, like you knew exactly who you were and you were going to take it on. Can you just maybe describe that transition and what that looked like, and kind of how quick do you feel like it took place? And yeah, I just want to dive into that.
It took 3 years. I didn't have any fun. The players didn't have any fun. We didn't win a lot of games. But on the outside, the sugar coating we did made it look like everything was okay. But it wasn't. And that was, from 2011 to 12, 12 to 13, 13 to 14. And then at the end of the fall of 14, it was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. So it wasn't, I think, we found successes in other ways, in a variety of ways. So I don't know, I think you're in certain athletic departments, you create a cushion in some ways based on your record and your reputation and your work and your investment in that community. And I gave everything I had to Augsburg for all my guys, hard as I could. And I think that, when I took a step off the gas and struggled through that transition from win-win-win to family balance to self-discovery and how do we encourage these people to become better people, that's the most important. We're still trying to win, but it's going to be a byproduct of becoming the best version of yourself, whatever that means. Yeah, that took 3 years, and it was hard. It hurts. It was really ugly and gross. And I think that, hopefully everybody goes through that. Maybe not for 3 years, but hopefully everybody goes through that, because it really does shape who you become and how you can more effectively influence lives.
A lot of what you talked about today, Greg, has been about, the personal development, a lot about building the relationships, and really, you've dived into your core values, especially the for life. But one of the things that, for me as a 21-year-old looking at eventually hoping to get into the coaching scene, we'll see how, I don't want to plan too far ahead. But one thing for me is, how do you build a team dynamic around around this idea. One of our core values at UW Superior is family, and we try to make that our priority in terms of our core values. It's family, class, and passion. And you mentioned it isn't necessarily one of your core values, but I'm imagining that ties into a lot of what you do. Is you guys treat yourself as maybe not a secondary family, but your team is more of a family dynamic. How do you build a team dynamic that functions on the field and off the field and in the classroom as a coach with all of these different men, and still have the time to, and it maybe not have the time, but maybe it's required that you build all these individual relationships as well too?
You got to create vulnerability. First things first. And in order to do that, you have to be vulnerable yourself. And I think that's probably the greatest challenge for our guys to look at me and say, this is a person who is a real human being, as opposed to it's Holker, it's coach, it's whatever, it's great.
Yeah.
Oh shit, we got to hide on a corner here because he's coming. And there's just an automatic fear factor. Plus I'm a really intense guy too. So that's hard, I think, for people around me. My wife will say the same thing. I'm like, it's passion. So the words I hear you say, like, it's passion. She's like, that's intensity. Like, it's oozing out of you and it scares people. So I have to own that and share my stories in a way that makes me more human. Right. And in doing so and sharing my family with the guys and sharing that, I hope that helps. It's not going to help all of them, but I do as much as I can. But ultimately, the space that we create and the activities that we do in the early part of the season, we don't really care about soccer in the early part of August. Like, we don't care. I mean, the guys will be fooled. They think we do, but we don't as a staff. It's about creating the right environment that is conducive to love and family, as you talked about. And passion is a part of that. And that competitiveness comes from the training environment. But being vulnerable and letting them be vulnerable. So it's, sharing your story in front of the group, telling them who you are. And the stories that we hear in our locker room space, they're sacred to our space. But holy hell, they are things I never could have imagined as a human being who grew up with the life that I grew up in. I am a privileged white male to the core. And it's incredible the takeaways from those experiences for me personally. And so I know that it's influential to the guys. And when you do that, you create a safe space where more sharing goes on. And then that builds trust. And trust leads to an environment where we can offer feedback, which some will interpret as criticism, but feedback for growth and for improvement. And if I love you, I'm going to tell you that you're doing things that don't represent the values and person or characteristics that you say you want to be or that you are. I'm going to help you. That's going to be awkward for us sometimes because it's going to hurt for you to hear it, especially from somebody who you trust and you love. So that for us is the cheesy, Brene Brown version of things, but it's important, man. And that's where it all starts. And that's getting back to the question probably about scholastic versus club environment. That's probably why I like the scholastic environment more, because you can be vulnerable and you really are spending a lot of intimate time together, opening up and growing. And that creates a space where the team can come together. Now we can implement some of the soccer things because they're willing to accept the feedback. And then the relationships are established because there's vulnerability on two parts. And we know that we're human and we're not perfect, man. Like, I'm going to work my ass off for you. I'm going to do everything I can for you. I'm not always going to get it right. And I'm going to own that. And I'm going to repair it as quick as I can after I recognize that I've screwed it up. Because I'm going to screw it up. That's okay, man. It's okay for you to make a mistake with the ball. It's okay for you to make a mistake in the game, making a decision. It is not okay for you to make a mistake to let your teammates down by making a decision that influences the group off the field. That's not okay. But making a choice on the field with the ball, that's fine. And we want to celebrate and lift that up. And there's a difference between those mistakes. So I think hopefully that answers your question in some way, shape, or form.
Greg, I'm gonna pull out that thread a little bit here. I think when I hear you talk about family, it really kind of strikes a chord with me. It's something that we talk about in our program as well. And you and I have had some conversations about, that word family and, to truly be authentic when you use that word. I hear a lot of sports teams, they say, oh, we're a family because, we spend a lot of time together. We all like each other and we're all best friends. Like, that's not family. Like, family can be painful. Family is tough at times. I tell guys the only 2 fistfights I've ever been in have been with my brothers, right? Like, it doesn't mean we're always smiling and having a good time. That's not family. You use certain words in family. You use the word love. And I think, where you and I, at times, I think we're so connected is, I'm not afraid to tell my players I love them, and I think you're the same way. And I'm sure we've told our guys the same thing that, that's a word that's going to be used in our program and it's going to be okay to use that with each other and from coaches to players or whatever. But where I've heard some pushback from others on using that word family to describe your team environment is that family is supposed to be an unconditional love. And in a team environment, in a competitive team environment, there are going to be conditions at play. And I know how I've kind of answered that question, but I'd love to hear, if you were to get that pushback, can you describe how you can be a family, but with conditions?
I would turn it back on you and say, what are the conditions?
Level of play. I mean, if a guy's level of play dropped off, would he still be a welcome player on your team?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. There are people in our program who will never see the field. They'll never play in our first team.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they're not important. That doesn't mean they're not equally as important as our best player. It doesn't mean that. So I'll give you an example from this year. Toby Riensma is a walk-on goalkeeper from Michigan. This kid, Toby will listen to this and he'll laugh, but he'll acknowledge it. Clumsier than hell, right? He hadn't trained a bit. He's in a remote area. He just doesn't have access to the things that kids in an urban setting or a metro area have access to in regard to training, repetition, coaching, all those other things. He didn't have it. Shows up. He sends me a whole bunch of emails. He's really persistent. I'm like, fine. Tom Holma was a grad assistant at the time. Tom's like, come on, we got to have this guy on. Like, at least as a student manager or something. Like, he seems like a really good dude. I'm like, fine, Tom, whatever. He can be a goalkeeper coach or assistant coach. I don't care. Like, whatever. I don't want to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. He comes in. This kid's the glue of our program. So we just sent a survey. I just sent it out the other day. And the questions are about our team and our family. Like, who brings the group together? Who gets along with the most? Who's the real conduit here? Toby.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, here's a kid who he played a little bit, maybe like a half or two in a reserve game. He's never going to play. If he does, either he has done something heroic or we as a staff have done something opposite of heroic and not recruited properly to get the right goalkeepers in. He's a goalkeeper. But it doesn't stop him from working his ass off every single day. It doesn't stop him from leading and modeling behavior that others replicate and are curious to emulate. It doesn't stop him from being an on-campus leader. I mean, this kid, everyone on campus knows this kid because he is sincere. He's genuine. He's nice. He's loving, caring, selfless. He is unbelievable. Do we love that kid I love him more. So if that's a condition, I'm happy to have that condition in my program.
God, I love that answer. Yeah. And I'm going to add something in too, just kind of how we've tackled it is we've talked about family. We've talked about sort of becoming this tribal family where, really the definition for us as a tribal family is that we're going to, every member of our team is going to be as dependent on the family as the family is on every member of the team. And so really what it comes down to is that through being a part of our program, you're going to add value, the team is going to add value to you. The program will add value to your experience, but you have an expectation that you will also add value to the program. And when we talk about that, very seldom is the only way to add value through your ability to play. I think when I talk to our players, like I think I've had 2 players in my entire time here where it's like they were probably good enough where if they just showed up and played and could just add value as a player, they're probably going to help us win games. That might have been the only contribution they would have needed to make, and people would have just embraced them because they were that good. But by and large, like, we're not looking for luxury players. We're not looking for guys that can only add value that way. There's so many other ways to add value, and very rarely is it going to be just as a player, just by ability. So often it's so much more of what you do for that family unit, and you can bring to the experience for everybody. I love that, the way you answer that question, Greg.
And I'll say Lionel's an example of what you just talked about. He came, his value was as a player, but by the time he left, his value was so much more than as a player.
Mm-hmm.
It was everything. That's what matters.
Absolutely. All right, so Greg, I want to get into some quick hits then with some of these last questions. First one, kind of a softball question for you. Just what are your top 2 or 3 favorite moments as a coacher? I'll broaden it just within the game of soccer. Top 2 or 3 favorite moments.
Winning a conference championship in 2010, not for me, but for the community, for Augsburg, and for the athletic department. I think we were pioneering some things at the time. I thought it was a really powerful moment. And I would say after our win against Redlands in 2008, not because of, what we accomplished as a group of guys, but because of what we did afterwards. There were so many families that were able to be present. And we were grilling out, and those of age were having, it was an awesome experience as a family, as a program.
And that was to go to the Sweet 16, or?
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was like, we were in Whitworth. I think Thursday we beat Whitworth in penalty kicks. Then we flew through, I forgot, it's like 4 stops, but it was like, Oakland to Burbank to Ontario, to take a bus to here, to vans to Redlands, to walk on the field, and guys could hardly move their legs. And that was the time I had a higher respect for pro athletes. I'm like, how the hell do these guys do this? Next training light day, and then we go and we beat Redlands. You got to be kidding me. They were so good. Fakema and what was the guy's name? He went to play for Colorado Rapids as a 9. Fakema played for Chicago Fire. They had unbelievable guys on their team. But all this happened within 3-4 days. So we go back to the hotel, go back, whatever, we do our thing, and at 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., everyone on time in the vans driving to LAX. Like, it was awesome.
Oh, that's cool. I have an idea of how you'll answer this one, but I want to ask it. What is the stronger feeling for you? Do you love to win, or do you hate to lose more?
Hate to lose. I'm not going to go Kobe Bryant on this and say that there's, it's neither. I hate to lose because I expect to win. So I hate to lose.
Has that changed at all? Or has that always been, as a player, as a coach, has that always been your?
Always.
Cool.
Maybe you can see it. Maybe you can't. Less now today, because again, I'm able to alter the why we do what we do, but I still hate losing.
What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned as a coach through your entire time?
That my job isn't to tell others what to do, but to help them find their way to do it.
Love that. That's super clean.
Put a hashtag on it. Let's go.
That's right there.
Well, with that, Greg, I guess, the last thing I wanted to do is just, I wanted to maybe tell a story about just kind of how you and I became friends and kind of my side of it. When I first started coaching in 2008, I didn't have really any experience as a coach. I had coached a couple of years of high school, not dissimilar to your story, except I think you coached at a much higher level and a lot more of it. You had a lot more experience getting into that college coaching role. And I think you were much more intentional about it than I was. And I kind of just fell into it. And when I got into the role, I forget if it was the first year or second year, we played Augsburg at Augsburg. And I think you guys beat us 1-0, and it was one of those games where you probably should have thumped us 4 or 5-0. We just had a lot of grit and were able to keep the scoreline close. And I just remember not, I don't think you were rude or anything like that, but there wasn't, a real cordial exchange. It was just kind of like it was a professional exchange of kind of who's this new guy, like, down at my stadium, whatever. That was my take of it. And I had this idea of Greg Holker, the Augsburg coach, as this guy who just you're going to Sweet 16s, you're getting all the recruits that I want to get, and I can't, take anybody off you. All I want to do is beat you. And I don't want to be friends with you, and I never will be. And that's, and I know you don't want to be friends with me. And that was kind of that was my take of our relationship very early on. And within months after the season, you had reached out to me, and I forget what it was about, but you had just reached out to me over something. And I got off the phone thinking man, this guy's all right. And I think I caught up with you at a recruiting event somewhere, and you just came up to me, and I didn't think you would even remember who I was. And we just kind of started, talking about the game. And from there, you became such an incredible mentor for me personally. And I think about, when you mentioned that you've got 100 players now who are coaching at some level, the outreach that you've had and the influence that you've had within the game. And I think that, that the trickle down influence of how that's helped other people, these young coaches, their players, how they're getting a better experience. It's just incredible. And it's why, since that, kind of first few months where I just wanted to beat you and I wanted to be, the opposition to you, I've really grown just to respect and admire you. And just, you've had such a positive influence on my coaching career. So I want to thank you as I always do, but man, thanks for being on the show today, and thanks for everything you've done for all these young people and for the game itself, man. It's just, you've had such a terrific influence, and I hope you continue doing it for a long time.
Well, I certainly appreciate you, and following your journey has been a great joy for me. So keep it up, except September 1st when we might play this fall.
Right? That's the scheduled opening. Let's hope it's still on for that date, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I'll have chocolate set up for Connie.
Perfect.
We'll be ready to go. Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey,
awesome.
thanks
well,
again.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
All right.